Thank you. I'm happy to be here, and I think it's fitting that Al Blumstein and I are like the bookends to these process, because in a sense both Al and I are concerned about and have spent our lives thinking about the infrastructure that enables many of the programs you've heard about to improve the quality of justice in America. And we both care deeply about the data that we need to collect in order to generate the statistics, which will do two things. It will help improve our policy making about what programs to pursue, but then over the course of time evaluate the extent to which those policies produce an impact that makes the public and Congress aware of the efficacy of those programs. And the President's Crime Commission did some amazing work, and it's not just because Al and I share a background in systems engineering and operations research. We see that this data is important, and I also had the privilege of cleaning up after Al's parade as I worked in the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration to implement many of the recommendations that came from the Crimes Commission. And I think most of us would agree that this is perhaps the most memorable and influential body of work that's ever been done in the criminal justice field. For many years, and still to this day, people use the Crime Commission work as the Bible for what we should be doing over all these years. And as you've heard, we're not doing a lot of those things. We've made valiant efforts, but there's much remaining to be done to improve the quality of justice in America in all the fields you've heard about. Two important things the Crime Commission did, in my view, was, first of all, as Wes spoke to you, I mentioned to you, to create the very first victimization survey. It was the dawn of a focus on victims in many ways, and even though there was not that much in the Commission's report about it, that idea that we needed to know more about the so-called dark figure of crime, the crimes that were not reported to the police, and therefore we should ask the victims whether they'd been victimized or not. And that initial prototype led to an ongoing project that persists to this day, 50 years later, of a national crime victimization survey. And over the years, the replacement LEA, the Office of Justice Programs, has continued to support that very important body of work to have quality data on what are victims experiencing. And the idea of using that data to help guide policy is the kind of evidence-based practice that I have to give credit to Laurie Robinson, who's sitting in the back of the room, who's really established the principle that evidence-based practice is the only way that OJP will look at funding new initiatives. And that whole change was started with the President's Crime Commission. The other thing that the Crime Commission did that's really outstanding is very strongly argue for there to be a national organization that focused on criminal justice statistics that was of the same level and capacity as a federal statistical agency, which is well defined by statute. And Congress did an admirable job in saying, yes, we should have some entity, and it turned out to be in the Justice Department, originally in LEAA, and then in the Office of Justice Programs, called the Bureau of Justice Statistics. It was actually called something else originally, but became that in 1974. But that was a body that would focus on the generation of useful statistics that could be used as a long-term measure, particularly of the scalability of programs, which is the only way to do that is really to have that national level of statistical analysis going on. And that started with the Crime Commission, and really Al's task force was what really got that off the ground, but it was reflected in the report. Over the years, the Bureau of Justice Statistics has done an admirable job of expanding its scope to deal with not only the victimization work, but other studies building on the kinds of work that's been done really since the 19th century, when this country first started some statistical programs with corrections, we didn't have any national programs to report the amount of crime in this country until 1930, when the Wickersham Commission said, you know, we really need some kind of national capability. And the FBI was asked to build this capability to submit a uniform crime report from initially just a sample of agencies, but ultimately all police agencies. And it took a long time to make that happen. And by the time the Crime Commission came around, they had just really gotten to the point where they had a good percentage of police departments reporting crimes and the crime reporting. And some of the increase in crime that you heard about earlier was, I think, due to the fact that more agencies were reporting and more people were reporting in the period of, you know, 1955 to 1967, when the Crime Commission did this. The Crime Commission still said in its prelude that the biggest problem they had was the lack of data. And the hardest part of their whole problem was to understand crime in America and what was the challenge of crime in a free society. Since all of the work that BJS has done over the years has been to extend that into other aspects of the criminal justice system, particularly with the fine series of reports on corrections. Unfortunately, with very little good statistical analysis of what happens in prosecution and what happens in the courts. Those two components of the criminal justice system are not well described by our current system of statistics. We also know that, you know, in various levels, thanks to the victimization surveys, that only about half the crimes are reported to the police. So the other half of those crimes are not, and we don't know much about those. And so most recently, the Office of Management and Budget asked the National Academies of Science to undertake a program to look at a new system of crime classification and to look at crime reporting, to modernize crime reporting. And I had the luxury of being on that panel, and we did appreciate the fact that there are many types of crimes that are not reported anywhere to the public in any kind of central capacity at all. Environmental crime, crimes against corruption, and white-collar crime are just not reported. We don't have a good handle on that. And probably the biggest elephant in the room is cybercrime. You know, you can't go anywhere and find a description of how much cybercrime is occurring in this country and what cost is what is the cost of that cybercrime that's happening. So we have to deal with those issues. I think from a perspective of what a new commission should do, that the first thing is to deal with the improvements that are going to happen thanks to the FBI moving to the National Incident-Based Reporting System by 2021. We will get the data to do the kinds of thing Larry Sherman was talking about, of targeting individual crimes like domestic violence. But beyond that, we need to collect data, and the commission should be addressing how to collect the data in accordance with the National Academy of Sciences proposal to have a much more complete accounting of crime across all the categories of crime that we can implement. The other final thing is that the use of statistics to help us shape policy and to help us evaluate what happens as a result of those policies needs to be shown to be of value to the politicians as well as the operational people. And that budget that Al mentioned, the paltry budget of BJS, needs to be expanded by at least an order of magnitude to show the value that we put on statistics to help us make informed decisions. Thank you.